It's great to be back. Let's hope that while we're broadcasting tonight, that I don't fall asleep on you, because I was very tired tonight. After making dinner, I went and I sat down in the living room, and I must have conked out for about an hour. Came back and looked at the time and said, "Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa! I got to get upstairs." And so I'm feeling nice and relaxed, and I'm really ready to move about with our show. And I'll tell you, I'm personally very encouraged when things that I find interesting are interesting to other people. Some of the things that I find fascinating are not necessarily of any interest to anybody else, and it's kind of like talking about guitar construction to my wife or something, and she might be like, "Uh-huh." It's just not a fascinating topic for her. But the last couple of shows that I've been talking about the nature of emotion, and I got some very strong and very positive responses from a variety of people, even bloggers who contacted me, quoting me and quoting the video and quoting other things that I've written on the topic, and writing me and asking me questions and making observations. So it was really quite a response. I wasn't quite expecting that, and it was a pleasant response to find. So one of the things, though, that did come up both last week, or actually, I think it was, last week, last Wednesday and Sunday, where some people did send me questions saying, "Well, wait a minute, how do you know that what you're saying is really more correct than what is typically understood in terms of your theory of understanding emotion?" And now, of course, when it comes to understanding the things that are going on inside of us human beings, where it's not as if we can take an emotion out, put it under a microscope, and really examine it and do some chemical tests and determine exactly everything about it. A lot of it has to be differentiated and understood through various different approaches that are uh, other than that involves the direct scientific observation and measurement of the actual emotions themselves. This is even true in terms of where emotions take place inside of the brain. We really don't know. We've associated some emotions with some areas, but it still seems to be kind of a vague and loose association. It appears that emotion and the sensation of emotion is really quite well distributed, not only throughout the brain, but throughout the body. The body, like a speaker, resonates. The butterflies in the stomach when you're nervous, the weakness in the knees, and there are many ways in which the emotions we might feel resonate in different parts of our body, depending on what that emotion might be. In fact, some ancient cultures actually thought that emotions existed in the body. We find even in the Bible where they talk about bowels of compassion and things like that, and it was really thought that the emotions were part of the gastrointestinal system and things like that. So it's when we're asking, how do we know some of these things? The truth is, uh, we don't know with the sort of certainty where we can be dogmatic about it. But nonetheless, I was arguing that our culture, not just our church, but our culture has some of this in a way that's kind of biased and kind of wrong. And I got to be honest with you, I'm of the opinion that it was my obsession with a fundamentalist religion that prevented me from growing up emotionally. And I think that it's the Christian bias of our culture that is actually, in some ways, kept, put a dead weight on the back of we're dragging the bricks of the past behind us instead of running free toward a better understanding of ourselves. So tonight I want to talk about some of the objections that people would have to the theory that I was proposing. And of course, let me reiterate that theory. So we understand the context I'm talking about. I was talking about human emotion, and I was saying that our emotions are fundamentally the response of sensation based upon significance and meaning in such a manner that our emotions are actually a response inside of us to ourselves. I was arguing that our emotions are not a response to reality. I was arguing that that emotions don't know anything about the entire universe outside of you. It's as if our emotions are extremely solipsistic. They just don't understand that reality exists outside of you. And you understand that, but emotions don't. Emotions are a response to what's going on inside of you. We tend to think of emotions as inept reality detectors because we've discovered that they respond to reality. They don't, but we think they do, and we've noticed that they don't really always do a very good job of it. And there's a reason for it. In fact, it's a dishonest reason. The reason why emotions don't always do a perfect job in responding to reality, well, there's two reasons. Number one, I want to argue your emotions are never a response to reality. They're always a response to what you are doing with reality. And the second reason why your emotions are not always in jiving with reality is because you're not jiving with reality. Your perspective and your focus are not honest. And therefore, I really see emotions as serving a primary function of helping you answer your own question of, so, how am I doing? What am I thinking? What's my what are my thoughts really? What are my values really? What is it that this really means to me? And your emotions are a nonverbal summarization of the attitudes, the values, and the sensation of meaning and significance in terms of emotion that you experience as a response to what's going on inside of you. And they are not in any manner a response to what's going on in the outside world. In fact, the only reason why your emotions have anything in common with the outside world is because you happen to be focusing on the outside world. You happen to have a perspective about the things you're currently encountering in the outside world. And as a result, your emotions being a reflection of you, while you're focused and perceiving certain things, your emotions are engaged on those things as you respond to them in your focus and perspective. And some people might say, oh, okay, well, sounds like you're really just getting kind of technical, as if, haha, I'm smarter than you are. It's really this way, not that way. But it really gets more important than that. It's not just a technical difference that makes no never mind. Um, the difference is that the way we handle our problems that are emotionally based is sometimes extremely faulty and very immature and very irresponsible because we don't understand that emotions are a response to what we are doing with reality. They are not a response to reality itself. For example, what if you find that there's a particular person that you find difficult to accept and very irritating? And let's say it's your Aunt Peggy. I don't have an Aunt Peggy. I don't know that I know anyone who has an Aunt Peggy. I'm just picking a name out of the air. But let's say you just don't like Aunt Peggy. Well, maybe your initial answer is, well, let's avoid Aunt Peggy. Well, that solution is based upon the assumption that the way you feel when you're around Aunt Peggy has something to do with Aunt Peggy. And I'm saying it doesn't. Has nothing to do with Aunt Peggy. Nothing to do with her whatsoever, even though that may be what you feel every time you're around Aunt Peggy. It's not as if Aunt Peggy is the reason why you feel that way. What I'm saying is this: whatever it is about Aunt Peggy that you focus on, whatever it is about Aunt Peggy that you focus upon and the way you understand it, that's what irritates you. That's what aggravates you. It is your focus and your perspective, and your emotions are simply honestly feeding back to you this sensation in the language of experience of emotion. What it is, your focus and perspective of Aunt Peggy really is. If you don't like that sensation, well, I would suggest that your first solution ought to be is you should reevaluate Aunt Peggy in terms of what are you focused on? when you're around Aunt Peggy, what draws your attention and what might be there that you're kind of ignoring? And in terms of those things that draw your attention, in terms of those things that you're ignoring, what do you really think about those? What do you think those things really say? What do you think those things really mean? What do they mean to you? And if you were to ask these questions, you might find that, you start paying attention to Aunt Peggy a little differently. You might never enjoy her if she's an irritating person in a sense, but you might find that you can empathize with her better. You can deal with the issue better. Or you might discover something. You might discover that part of the reason you don't like Aunt Peggy is because she's always violating your boundaries. And I would suggest that there, instead of avoiding her, you should learn how to use some courage and draw the line with Aunt Peggy, something like that. But anyhow, the point that I'm making with this particular illustration is this, that when we misunderstand, when we think that our emotions are a response to the external stimulus, when they're actually a response to the way we focus upon and a response to the way we understand the things we're focusing upon in the external world. Our emotions are really a response to us and what we're doing with reality, not reality. We would be more apt to try to resolve some of the what we might call emotional laden problems, challenges, and difficulties by reconsidering our focus and our perspective rather than trying to rearrange the world around you. After all, I've come to the conclusion that people are pretty much as miserable as they choose to be. People are pretty much as miserable as it serves their purposes to be. Most of us choose a kind of an ethos. We choose a personality, a kind of a framework and a frame of mind with which we kind of create this facade that we present to the world based on what we think is going to work for us. And when things aren't working for us, rather than altering our facade, we would prefer to try to rearrange the external world. But, if you're a person who tends to be, irritated with other people, I guarantee you it's not really other people that are the problem. It's your perspective and your attitude and your focus when it comes to other people. That's the real problem. And oftentimes when it comes to managing our emotions, that if there's anything to manage, it's not how you feel. And it's not where you are or what's going on in the external world. Not to say that those can't be problems, but that's not the problem at hand when you're not liking the way you feel. The problem may be, more likely, the best place to start is looking at your focus and your perspective. And this is all part of my claim that your emotions are not a response to the external world. They're not a response to reality. They don't know anything about reality. They're just being honest with you about what you're doing with reality, summarizing it into the sensation of mood and feeling in terms of what it is you really believe to be true about the things that have captured your notice, from both those things that are right smack dab in the center of what you're looking at and those things that are just kind of peripherally out to the edge of your mind. That's where your emotions are really based. They're a response to what you're doing with reality. Now, we tend to, in our culture, disrespect our emotions. We denigrate them. We treat them as if they're inept reality detectors. And I'm saying that is really dishonest, because the truth is the reason why many times the way we feel is not truly reflective of the reality we know is because we are not willing personally to honestly rework our past. We're not really prepared to let go of the values and the story we have come up with that explains to us the meaning of things as we get older. Instead, we live in the values and observations of the past and avoid the hard work of maintaining a contemporary, present, relevant attitude about our world. And as a result, that's why sometimes when we feel things, the way we're feeling isn't really in keeping with what we're discovering is really going on. Now, this also becomes part of my proof of my argument. Remember, I said that emotions are a response to what you're doing with reality, and they're not inept. They are absolutely fully credible, and you can rely on your emotions 100% to do what it is they do. Now, here's part of the argument that I would offer. We to try to demonstrate the truth of this. First of all, we live in a culture that where I would say that the area of psychology, the area of sociology, the area of, say, pharmacology, are areas of study today that are experiencing, I would argue, a little bit of a credibility and integrity gap when it comes to their use of statistics. These are areas of science that like to misuse statistical correlation. Now, I've had the opportunity to actually study statistics at the college level in both a mathematics department and in a sociology department, in a psychology department, and in an anthropology department. And I found it rather interesting to note that they tended to use statistics very differently in ways that a mathematician would say, oh, no, you can't do that. And one of these things is the concept of the correlation. Now, I don't want to get too technical on you, but basically, correlation is a statistical phenomenon whereby two different variables are seen to kind of vary, either in sympathy with each other or in response against each other in a manner that is almost predictable. As one increases, the other increases, or as one increases, the other decreases. And we notice that there is this relationship between the two variables. Now, in statistics proper, when you study statistics mathematically, where you're not putting it into the context of psychology or pharmacology or anthropology or sociology, just from the pure standpoint of mathematics, when we find a statistical correlation, the reason why we say correlation is because they are correlated. But what most sciences tend to do is they tend to say, well, these two things are related. Well, let's think about it for a moment. No. Oh, it makes sense to me. This causes that. And that is a violation of mathematics. You can't do that with statistics. When you find that two things are statistically related, all you know is there is a relationship between them. You have no idea what that relationship is. And it may be obvious, and the obvious answer might be correct, or it may not be obvious, and the obvious answer might be as wrong as it comes. I mean, for example, let me give you an example of some correlations that don't really make as much sense as you might think they do. There was a time when people were doing studies on various cities and some of the habits that they had. And they noticed that in certain cities across the United States, that when the attendance would go up in churches, that lo and behold, attendance would also go up in the bars. People would go out to the bars and drink more. And now, this is very interesting. And they noticed that this was extremely correlated. That is, these two variables tended to always move together. When church attendance was up, bar attendance was up. Church attendance is down, bar attendance is down. Now, some people might say, well, it's not surprising, religion is enough to drive most people to drink. And so there you go, it's the religion that causes all the drinking. Or some people might say, it seems more obvious to me that that people get to drinking and they feel bad about it. And so they have to repent and they start getting very religious and they start going to church. So you see, it's all this too much drinking sends people out to church. Well, these are all very interesting stories. Now, it is a true fact that as you looked at numerous different cities over time, that sure enough, it is a true statistical fact that as attendance goes up in churches, attendance goes up in bars. When attendance goes down in churches, attendance goes down in bars. But guess what? You're not looking at the whole picture here. Guess what else we also discovered? That the population of various cities changes. Sometimes it's growing, sometimes it's shrinking. And, as the population grows, there's more people living there. And it's not surprising that when more people live there, there's more people there to go to church. There's more people there to go to the bars. When a population shrinks, there's not as many people living there anymore, and therefore fewer people going to church and fewer people going to bars. And it's not as if the population growing or shrinking actually causes people to go to church. So you see, these are variables that are working together because they are in various ways related. But population growth doesn't cause people to go to bars. It doesn't cause people to go to church. It doesn't going to church doesn't cause people to go to bars. Going to bars doesn't cause people to go to church. And people going to church more and bars more doesn't cause the population of a city to grow. But you can see they're related to each other in a manner that is statistically connected. But we don't have the ability, just because we know they're statistically connected, to say that one causes the other. But when it comes to certain areas of science, a lot of scientists want to make this jump that say, well, we've noticed that these two things are correlated, and it makes sense to us that this causes that. And so we believe we have a statistical foundation to believe that we have established a cause and effect relationship here. And I say, no, you haven't. You haven't got a thing. You know that they're related, but you don't know how they're related. In fact, scientifically, you can't say that one thing causes another until you can actually take a look at, step by step, the various physical processes of cause and effect that lead to the actual effect taking place. Now, let me give you another example of how a correlation can work in a way that doesn't necessarily work the way you might think it does. Um, if you saw the movie The Princess Bride, there was this poison in there called iocane poisoning, and it could kill you, you know. But so I can talk about iocane poisoning because there's no such thing. It's just a fictitious thing. But let's pretend for a moment that we're going to say that iocane causes death. And there's a sense in which that might be true. But how does it cause death? Have you ever noticed that the causes of death, when they get reported, if you ever take a look at them, they don't always seem to make sense. They don't always seem, you find people who die of certain causes, and you wonder what's going on here. And when you begin to look at it, you discover that the so-called statistics of causes of death, it tells a story that has a lot of gaps in it. For example, my dad had a rare blood disease, and he died at the age of 92. He had this rare blood disease. It was a form of a blood cancer. The truth is, nobody ever dies of that blood cancer. Nobody ever does. But everybody who ever gets that blood cancer dies within 7 years. There's this process of the falling apart of the body. When they die of pneumonia, they die of this, they die of that, they die of other causes that are attributed to the death. But these things are really the result of the breakdown of their blood system in various ways, so that most people who come up with that rare blood disease are dead within 7 years. But their death is never really attributed to that cancer. It's attributed to the way things unfold. So you see, when we're dealing with cause and effect, we're not always dealing with things that are clearly understood. And when we try to make the things that we do understand something we clearly understand, we start drawing implications from the clarity that just doesn't exist. And this is also true of our emotions. Now, let me give you an example that I think will help to tell this. If I were to say something to you that I knew would offend you, and I say it, and sure enough, you respond by being offended, we would think that we have now drawn a correlation between the offensive things I said and your feeling offended, which would seem to disprove my theory that you're being offended, that you're having that feeling of offense, is not a response to reality, but rather it's a response to what you're doing with reality. Well, that might seem to make the argument. But what if this? Have you ever done this? Men tend to do this more than women. In fact, women tend to do the opposite thing. Men can sometimes be in a situation where somebody's offending them, and they don't get it. They miss it. They don't even realize they're being, disrespected. They didn't realize it. And do they feel offended? No, of course they don't. Why? Because they're not even aware of the fact that they're being offended, or that somebody is trying to offend them or trying to disrespect them. On the other hand, There are times when somebody may say something to us and we misunderstand what they said or what they meant or where they're coming from or what the implications are. And we feel great offense when they're not even really disrespecting us. Well, I think that the story I'm telling you shows you that sometimes when we're involved in a conversation and we are focused on it and we have a perspective about what's going on, sometimes our focus and our perspective is rather representative, and in a result of the fact that our emotions are a response to our focus and perspective, it's not surprising that our feelings also seem to be in tandem with what it is that's going on in the external world. But when we seem to be oblivious to what's going on in the external world, we don't have any feelings about it whatsoever, indicating that our emotions are not actually a reaction to what's going on in the external world. It's rather a reaction and a response to our focus. Until the external world actually grabs our focus, until it actually grabs our focus about things about which we have a perspective, we will have no feelings about it whatsoever. This, therefore, demonstrates my argument that our emotions are a response to what we are doing with reality rather than to reality itself. And this is true every time because the strong correlation is between what you are thinking is going on rather than between the way you feel and what is actually going on. So your emotions are a response to your perspective and your focus, not to reality. This is important to understand because this means that the tweaking needs to be done in your perspective and your focus. Also, this is part of that argument that I come up when it deals with emotions, where I'm saying that what is it you should do with your emotions? Now, this is going to sound odd to some of you, and I've been arguing this, that here's what you should do with your emotions. No matter what it is you feel, here's what you should do with it. Feel it. That's all. There's nothing else to do with it. Embrace it. Lean into it. Be honest with it. Be honest with yourself. Be aware of what your feelings might actually tell you about what in the current situation actually has my focus. What is my perspective about the things in my current situation? What's my perspective about these things? What is it? By being honest with how you feel, you can be far more honest about what your perspective really is, far more honest about what really is grabbing your attention and what you're ignoring. You know, we all have been in that situation where you're talking to someone and you're saying, um, are you okay with this? And their response is, oh yeah, I, I'm fine. You know, and they're white knuckling it. This is a person who's trying to stiff arm and distance themselves from being honest about their feelings. And sometimes people will do that, not because they want it to be dishonest people, but because they're not really sure what they should do about their emotions. They're not comfortable enough to be the kind of a person who can say, I'm just going to have them. They're people who may feel that if they have emotions they don't like, that there's something they're supposed to do about it. And that's not true. This is true only to people who think it's true because they've always said that my emotions are a response to my external world, which means that if I don't like my emotions, there's something I need to do to change my external world. This is not true. Getting back to like Aunt Peggy, basically what I'm saying is this. Now, if we find that when you look at Aunt Peggy, that you find her irritating because she actually violates your boundaries, well, then you have a boundary issue with her. The fact that you don't like it is interesting and it is relevant to your experience, but it doesn't have anything to do with what you need to do about Aunt Peggy. If Aunt Peggy is violating your boundaries, you need to draw lines. Now, this is especially true when dealing with people who, for example, have what we call borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder is a disorder where people have a need to focus on the very things that always blame everybody else, always make everyone else feel responsible for their happiness and their misery. And you end up walking on eggshells around these people. And part of the way that disorder operates is they have this way of reacting with certain feelings that they wear on their sleeves in a various way that they justify and that they are not the least bit ashamed of, but that they're using to manipulate the people around them to feel obligated to respond in a particular way. Now, here's the interesting thing. Based on my theory of emotions, what should you do when people are trying to push your buttons? And my answer is nothing. Nothing. In fact, it's often recommended the best way to deal with a person who has borderline personality disorder when they're trying to push your buttons is to don't respond at all. Or if they are really intended on manipulating you by pushing your buttons, get up and leave. Don't, you know, don't necessarily say, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm cutting you out of my life. We're not. You don't need to be that drastic. But if you say, look, you're trying to manipulate me, make me responsible for how you feel, and I'm not going to accept that responsibility. You're responsible for how you feel, not me. And so, if you want to change how you feel, then change your focus, change your perspective, change your choices, change your decisions, but don't change me. That ain't gonna work. And if you're gonna try and do that, then I'm getting up and I'm gonna leave. And you walk out of the room, whatever. And you don't do, and you will find that basically the borderline personality disorder operates by this person needing to push your buttons and getting you to respond in a particular way. When you're no longer responding in that particular way, their repertoire no longer works and they don't know what to do. And it's when it starts falling apart on them, this is part of where they begin to see how they are using their emotional state as a way of manipulating other people and of avoiding their own responsibility in being honest and being fair. And so, by recognizing that, that's a particular disorder that deals especially with taking advantage of the fact that most of us feel responsible for the way other people feel about us, the way they feel about what we've done. Now, I'm not talking about being insensitive. That's also, a problem. Insensitive people don't want to know how you feel. I'm not talking about holding people responsible for how they feel by saying, it's not my problem. I don't care how you feel. I'm talking about recognizing that I am not responsible for how anybody else feels. And because I'm not responsible for how they feel, I am totally free to understand, hear, and embrace exactly how they feel because it isn't my responsibility. I'm merely available to be present. And if somebody is, say, angry and upset because, I was hoping you would do this and do that, and you didn't do it. No, and they're very upset. I don't feel the least bit responsible for the fact that they're upset. Now, if there was something I had promised to do, I think I should definitely um, uh, own up to the fact that, well, I didn't keep my promise, and I think I owe them an apology. But I rob them of something. If they have a right to be irritated with me, I need to let them be irritated with me. I broke a promise, and I'm comfortable with that, and I don't feel the need to change that. If anything, I need to change my awareness of what promises I make and keep them, you know? And so I need to draw this line between where the responsibility for emotions are. Now, this is basically the way that I would say that emotions are a response to what's going on inside of you based on four specific things. And this was my basic argument. Your emotions are a response to number one, your focus. Number two, your perspective about the things within your focus. Number three, your general state of health constrains what emotions you're capable of having at any given moment. And number four, your capacity to perceive and appreciate reality for what it is. It also constrains the limits. You can't have feelings about things you're oblivious to or don't know about or don't understand. Let's see, we have a comment. Aren't our morals built on how actions affect others? I believe that is very foundational to our morality. Yes. But that still doesn't change the fact that emotions are what they are, a reflection of what's going on inside of us. In fact, part of our morality ought to be built on the fact that although I'm going to argue that my emotions and your emotions are our responses to what's going on inside of us, many times what's going on inside of us is occasioned by the events that are taking place in reality. So, if I come up inside of your face and I start getting in your face and I start becoming a real nuisance and a problem, this is not to say, well, I bear no moral responsibility for what's going on here because, you're responsible for your own emotions, not me. And just the fact that I'm in your face is just not, no, no, no. I need to recognize the fact that none of us can voluntarily not have feelings based on how we're dealing with reality. So when I'm giving you a reality you must deal with, I need to accept responsibility for the fact that that's the reality I'm giving you to deal with. Now, how you deal with it is still your problem. It must be your problem. And I'm not saying that I want to distance myself from responsibility in what I do, but the reason I need to distance myself from responsibility in how you feel about it is because you have far more power as a person, as an individual, when you realize you have choices in how you expect yourself to perceive what's going on, how you will handle it, what you think it means, what you think it says about you. And since that is your responsibility, and I leave that responsibility with you while accepting full responsibility for what I do and what I'm intending to do, this gives you the power to have some flexibility with what you can do rather than settling into some sort of a protocol where this is your button. I get to push your button, and it would be wrong for me to push your button. But don't you ever change your button because I need it there so I can continue to push it whenever I might feel like doing the wrong thing. I'm sorry. It doesn't work that way. When you decide how your buttons will work, when you have the power to decide how your buttons will work, you end up taking your power back, and no one else can manipulate you in that way. And this is a part of our genuine and authentic independence, as well as our morality, and the fact that we're throwing the realities at each other and providing the occasions is something we have to accept full responsibility for in our morality. It still doesn't change the nature of how emotions work. Now, one of the things I think would be helpful to talk about is, then what I'm saying is the proper way to manage our emotions is to, first of all, just have them, embrace them, let them do their work. And I even argue that you will discover that when emotions have done their complete work, that they really are an expression of dignity. Why does a child who's being demoralized, criticized, demeaned, put down, why does that child feel pain? Well, because that child is a very precious being. That child has some innate inside sense that they are precious, and they hurt because something very precious is being damaged. It's being hurt. And so there's a sense there in which that pain is very honest and very real. The real shame comes when they think that pain says something about them that validates the criticisms, and that's where the real damage comes on. And so, but it's nonetheless, it's the way they perceive the validity of the demoralization and the criticism that actually does the damage and determines their feelings. Viewer comment. And if we should never feel inclined to change based on how it makes others feel, then it follows that we should be moral. So when should we ever feel inclined to change our behavior? That's an excellent question. I think that the answer to that question is this: when it is a wise thing to do. You see, anytime we decide to do something, we are making a decision to do something that will have an outcome. Will the outcome of doing this be more likely to be this, or will the outcome of doing this be more likely to be that? We make our decisions based on the outcome we honestly hope will be precipitated by such choices and such actions. We make our decisions and our changes outcome oriented, looks to the future. By making this change, I am altering the way things are going to tend to work out in the future. Now, I'm not always perfect in predicting that, but our morality is based upon wisdom. The fact that we are feeling certain things should indicate to us what our perspective and our focus is. Now, understand something. I'm not saying that the focus and the understanding and the perspective is necessarily wrong. If you are an offensive and egregious person and you're constantly offending me and I'm feeling offended, I am not going to say, well, I'm responsible for my own feelings. I'm feeling offended. It's not your problem. It's mine. I'm not saying that. I am saying that if I'm offended, that's my problem. But the fact that you are engaged in a behavior that is offensive, and a behavior that is hostile, I will deal with that. I will have to deal with that with you. In fact, I'm more likely to deal with your hostility. And although I might be honest with you about how your hostility makes me feel, I don't want to make you responsible for how I feel. I want you to be responsible for the hostility you're choosing to demonstrate, to exhibit, to choose to do. I want to make you responsible for your choices. I want to make you responsible for your intentions. I want to make you responsible for the outcomes that can be likely predicted from the choices you're making and the actions you're taking, rather than and of course part of those outcomes will be the way people will tend to feel. But at the same time, my power comes from owning those emotions as my responsibility. And here's why. Suppose you are a particularly hostile person and I'm offended. And I look at the focus and I look at my perspective and I say, my focus is a right one. It's a balanced one. It's a representative one. And so is my perspective. And I'm offended. Okay, great. Well, then I will be offended. I should be offended. And it's okay for me to be offended. And there's not a problem in being offended. So I'll be offended. Life isn't, if you're born into a poor family and you have to make a difference in the way that life is going to work out for you, it may not be fair, but that's the way it is. That's the way it works. And if you're in a set of situations where the proper way that you will feel when focused and having a healthy and right focus on that is an unpleasant feeling, well, that's the way it is. You have to deal with that. And if there's any you're going to change in the situations that you don't feel that way, it's going to be that which is wise in dealing with things that help to produce a better outcome. We have other comments here. Someone says, awesome and so true. Nice not to overlook the physical aspect, which can drive the rest. Well, that's honesty, plain and simple. I also skipped one earlier saying, you're going, if it's not ever right to expect someone to change based on how their actions affect us, then it's not right to expect them to change their immoral behavior. So when is it right to correct bad behavior? I don't think the question itself. I understand the conundrum you're dealing with. Bad behavior is a way of categorizing behavior. It's a value statement. This is not to say that it's an inaccurate statement, but I'll tell you what. If somebody is engaged in bad behavior, I would not ever want to get them to change that behavior because that's bad. No, I'm not that I don't want them to change their behavior, but I would want them to change their behavior based upon values that they embrace, honesty that they deal with, and a recognition that they have to be held responsible for their choices. I would want them to do what they do, to change what they do, because they come to a point where they realize they have a better option than the one they've been choosing. And rather than categorizing the behavior as bad, it strikes me as a way of trying to manipulate other people's behavior for reasons that make them have to conform to the cookie cutter of our approval. I really believe if there's anybody who needs to approve your choices and your actions, it's you. And you need to approve them based on honesty. So therefore, if you're going to change your actions or ask somebody else to change their actions, you need to give them good reasons for doing so or help them discover good reasons. And oftentimes bad behavior is an expression of other things that are going on. And the bad behavior is in some ways really a symptom of other things that underlie the issues, that if you can deal with those things, deal with them honestly, sensitively, and firmly, you will find yourself, I think, having better luck in dealing with changing that bad behavior and helping them to find positive, truly proactive reasons for changing rather than, oh, that's bad. Okay, then I won't do that. That's shame-based change. And I don't think shame-based change ever really works. We have other comments here. Why take offense at all? That's a good question. Why take offense at all? I suppose that we're offended when something we value is not respected. And but I would say this: when I do take offense, my attitude about taking offense is that when I'm offended, I'm offended. It's no big deal. It's not a problem. I don't feel a need to let you know I'm offended. I don't feel a need to hide it. It is for me a confirmation that I have values that are not respected by everybody. And if I choose to have those values, then I choose to be offended. That's okay. I'll, I, I'll accept that. That's fine. But I'll tell you one thing: I don't want to ever hide from my feelings. I don't want to ever not have to have them. I don't want to ever be in a situation where I cannot afford to face them for what they are. And the only way I can do that is by disengaging them from thinking I have to make anybody other than myself responsible for them, or that I have to have them any particular way. They can just simply honestly be a reflection of my focus and perspective. And if it's not really working for me, then I need to change my focus and perspective. And guess what? My emotions will be the first clue that I need to do that. And so I can't just run on in life pretending I don't need to change my focus or perspective, because my emotions, if I'm going to be honest with them, won't let me. Your comment in reference to when it's right to change it, when ego is not present. Yeah, I suppose I think that ego is a concept I think that is difficult sometimes to think about, but we often talk about ego as if it's not just the sense of self, but also the sense of self-importance. And I do think that there is this notion that we can fall into. I am a very valuable human being. I really believe that. I believe that the preciousness of my existence is beyond my ability to really even properly understand and appreciate. I am in the process of discovering just how wonderful and awesome it is to be me. But this is not by any means a unique experience. This is true of everyone. And I don't ever need to somehow exert the awesomeness of my self-existence at the expense of the awesomeness of the self-existence of someone else. I mean, there is a win-win way of all of us being able to deal with the issues that are before us, where everyone is given the dignity and the graciousness of being human and valuable. And many times the people who are behaving in a way that contradicts that value, it's because of damage and pain and other things where their real value has been robbed from them so that even they can't embrace it. And to love them and to find a way of helping them to restore that is really a more productive way of dealing with that, if you can. And if you can't, you may have to draw a line. But you draw that line not with saying, you stay over there, you ass. That's not what you need to do. We need to draw this line so as to, make sure that we're maintaining, a propriety and what that, and, allow yourself to miss that person. And the freedom that there would otherwise be is probably better. Now, we only have a few minutes, but one of the things I was hoping to do, and this won't take too long, hopefully, is since managing our emotions comes from both embracing them, and then if we're going to change anything, we're going to change how we focus, we're going to change our perspective. Where does our perspective come from? How do we form a perspective? And I'm going to say that our perspective comes from our history. We have, well, for example, I wear glasses. I don't wear them when I'm on the air because I really need them for distance. And right now I got a camera right in front of me and I can see it better without my glasses on. What are glasses? How do I know what glasses are? I have a concept. I have a perspective of glasses. Where did that perspective come from? How did I cognitively come to an awareness of what glasses are? How did I come to a cognitive understanding of anything? Well, as it turns out, from birth, we all develop some various techniques that are part of the biology of our being human. And to make a long story short, maybe we can go into this in more detail later because we only have about a minute left. And Joey, give me a good countdown. Tell me exactly how much time I have left. Thank you. 0, he says. Ooh, I'm looking at a clock that tells me I got a minute. So let me wrap it up here. We'll have to deal with perspective next time. But basically, to put it in a real quick summary, our perspective comes from our history of general observations that we think we have made of things as we experience them, combined with the way we have noticed certain things operate through the various changes that happen around them or to them, and then also combine that with the way significant people we respect or think of as credible deal with those objects, and that our brain actually coagulates these things together into something that becomes for us a basic rubric for how we understand various objects. And I'll talk about that more later. But sometimes our history is misinterpreted. Sometimes our general observations are inaccurate. And sometimes the people we respect are not worthy of the respect we give them. And so our concept of what things are, what they mean, what their value is, can change as a result of reworking those aspects of our history. We'll talk about that perhaps next time. Anyhow, thank you for all of your comments. Thank you for the responses you've given to me about this issue of emotions. I hope it has helped you to understand this in a very different way. And we'll talk to you again next time. Until then, this is Bob Graves, the Unconventional Pastor, signing off. We'll talk to you again on Sunday.